Aloha and welcome. My name is Giseni, or Dr. J. I am your podcast host. I'm also a licensed psychologist, award-winning author, and happiness coach. So last time we recorded a podcast episode, my goal was to enlighten you to what my spiritual journey has been like on the bird's eye view, I will say, right? Not surface level, bird's eye view. But I also wanted to talk about what it meant to be as a people pleaser, because this is one of the biggest things that the Bodhi Sparks members struggle with. And to be honest, it's something that I've very much struggled with growing up in a traditional Korean home. So we immigrated to the States when I was 7. My brother was 6, maybe not quite 6 yet. And my mother had both of us on her back. We came here with the promise, or she came here with the promise, we just tagged along, with the promise of a bright and happy future for her kids. But I'm sure you've already heard the story, and if you haven't, I've written a little bit about it in the Bodhi Blueprint, about the struggle that my mom went through acclimating into this particular culture in this country, and the struggle that she had coming to this country. It's her story, not mine to tell, so I'm not going to go too much into it. And if I feel like, or if I sound like I'm short on breath, it's because I just finished eating a really big lunch. And I always tell myself that I won't record episodes after a big meal like that, but the timing just sometimes works out this way. But the last time you and I sat together for an episode, we were starting to tap into this idea that people-pleasing is this habit that's going to be very hard to break if there are a couple of things that you don't keep in mind. And in recapping last week's episode, for myself, as I'm getting ready to record this episode, I realized that my subconscious mind, what it did was it actually interweaved my spiritual journey with this idea of people pleasing and how to get past it. But it did so in a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Secretive is not the word. It planted seeds, or very subconscious, subtle reminders of how to effortlessly get past people pleasing. But today I wanted to spell it out for you a little bit more for those of us that either didn't catch last week's episode or just want to dive into it a little bit deeper before we head on over to the Bodhi Sparks to really embody the experience of someone who gets beyond and past societal expectations and the conditionings we've had. So coming from, this is my ADHD mind here, coming from an immigrated family of Korean tradition, it's really no wonder or surprise that I was conditioned to have this people-pleasing attitude. In fact, being the elder or the eldest, I don't know which one I want to use right now, of 2, I have one younger brother, I had this notion implanted in me that I needed to be the adult of the house when my parents weren't around. And that was very often because my mom worked really long, my dad was out of the house a lot, and so I was in charge. And to be honest, for a little 7-year-old girl, that was a really heavy bag to be asked to carry. And I know that it wasn't anyone else's fault. I'm responsible for my own experience, and I'm so grateful for the sacrifices that my parents have made. But it was a hard time for me, not being able to be a 7-year-old kid and having to have or bear the responsibility of being an adult to another younger child, that I started to develop these traits, if you will, characteristics of someone that needed to keep the peace. Someone that needed to make sure that the other caretakers in the house were comfortable, were feeling safe, were feeling happy. And so I took on this role or persona of needing to please other people. Add to the fact that the 7-year-old me didn't have a word for this, but I felt really deeply. In fact, I would cry at the drop of a hat, or even just as an adult, I truly do experience these deep, deep wells of emotion that are really hard to contain. And if you were to ask me to put my psychologist hat on and analyze myself, the psychologist in me would say that I need some help regulating my emotions, that perhaps I don't have the proper resources or the tools to regulate my feelings, when in fact the wiser part of me now knows that that's not the case. It's not that I can't regulate my emotions, because if you saw me, I'm cool as a cucumber. I can act as aloof as you would find anyone in this world. I know how to regulate my emotions. And when I allow myself to be at my most raw and authentic and vulnerable, I really feel. To the point, and I mentioned this before in the last episode, that I actually find myself not trapped, overwhelmed is a better word, in these deep emotions of grief. But as much as I know that there are hardships and suffering and the uglies of this experience out there, I also know that it's also within me. As much as I know that as ugly as it gets, it actually is a precedent to how amazing it can be. So I haven't completely lost all hope yet for the state of humanity, for the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. I do try very hard not to get caught up or stumble into the politics of this world. In fact, the only thing I will listen to is NPR to get my quick 15-minute fix on what's actually happening instead of getting caught up in the dramatization of all of it. And now that I'm saying this, I forget where I was going with this. Oh yes. We wanted to talk about people pleasing. So people pleasing is something that I consider a habit. And the thing with habits is that the longer it goes for, the more ingrained it becomes. So depending on when you picked up your people pleasing habits, the more ingrained it can be. And no matter how many years of people pleasing that you've practiced, it really can be a little bit more graceful and effortless to come out of that habit than you think. It's not like Alcoholics Anonymous, where you have to declare that you are a people pleaser and brand it on your chest. In fact, I actually am very against doing that, because then you are subconsciously branding this identity as part of you that you need to live with for the rest of your life, when in fact it's just a frequency. It's just a habit that you've picked up. So people pleasing is, no matter how many years you've practiced it, no matter how ingrained it feels, something that you can, on purpose, with intention, climb out of. And it's something that can happen with as simple as a shift in the question that you ask yourself. I remember my Tony Robbins days back in 2016, maybe even before that, going to Unleash the Power events, having Tony literally spit on my face because I was front row. I had front row seats to the one event, the 1 year. And where was I going with this? I got so distracted by the spit. Unleash the Robin, Tony Robbins. Okay, Unleash the Power, not Unleash the Robin. Unleash the Power by Tony Robbins, 2016, getting spit on. There's something I remember about it. Maybe it had to do with anchoring, conditioning. There was something somewhere I was going with this, and it'll come back to me, I'm sure. But no matter how long you've practiced it, you can uncondition yourself. And this is where I was going. So the one thing I've learned from Tony Robbins is that we perceive this world not based on the things we tell ourselves, but the questions we ask ourselves. And that the quality of our lives, the quality of the emotions I experience, the perspective that I have, it has everything to do with the questions that I subconsciously ask myself. And so the smart thing to do here is to figure out what those questions are, right? And this is where I fell into the world of NLP and hypnosis, and it's been incredibly powerful and transformative. But nothing beats self-awareness. Nothing beats understanding yourself to a point where this indescribable quality of who you are is something that you become familiar with. Just like you are familiar with the voice of your mom in a way that you can't describe to me how she sounds, that I could actually point her out. But it's just this ineffable, indescribable quality of who you are. When you come to know that quality, regardless if it's because you went through the platform or the path of NLPing yourself or hypnosis or positive psychology or whatever way that you've come to find yourself, if you understand that you are this ineffable, indescribable quality, I am, period, like we talked about in our last episode, when you get to that point and you become self-aware of not just who you've been conditioned yourself, who you've been conditioned to believe you are of yourself, who you see yourself as in the context of this world, the types of questions that you ask yourself subconsciously. And then it goes on further than that. It goes beyond that. What types of experiences do you bring forth in this life from past life baggage, from your ancestors, that the DNA that runs in every cell of your body, it carries information that we can't quite transcribe just yet, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. So when you get to understand who you are as an ineffable quality that carries all of this baggage from past lives, your ancestors, from your childhood experiences, from the questions or the types of questions you ask yourself, you're going to realize that that in and of itself is probably more than enough to help you to climb out of this role of playing the people pleaser, because it is just a frequency, it's a habit, it's a mask that you put on. It's not a role. It's not something you have to brand yourself with, that you're stuck with forever. It's something that you do. People pleasing is an action. It is not an identity. That in and of itself should be enough to shake you free from whatever holds it has of you. However, if you're anything like me, there's that part of you, the Aquarius, or maybe just the part of you that likes to ask everything and anything, and that nothing in this world makes sense unless you know the meaning of it all. But if you're anything like me and you want something tangible, you want to understand conceptually how to beat this thing, this habit, this addiction of being a people pleaser, the easiest way truly is for you to ask this one particular question. And this question actually gets to the bottom of the human experience in general. But this question goes like this. Okay, so we talked about giving yourself the pause last time. Once you've mastered that, once you've been able to create some space between you and the response, in that space of you and the response is obviously an expectation or a request. But also in that space is your ability to ask a different question. And it really doesn't matter what the question is that you've been asking. If you are really curious to know, and this is something you're dying to figure out because you're just a curious person, you can feel free to join us at the Bodhi Sparks, where we dive into all of this, the nitty-gritties of all things self-development. But it doesn't matter what the question was. The question now can be, am I saying yes to this thing that I'm being requested of? Or am I saying yes because I'm afraid of how I'll feel if I don't? So it's a long question, so I'm going to say it again, and you can denote it and make it short in whatever way makes sense for you in your head. But the question goes like this. Am I saying yes to this, whatever the request is? Or am I saying yes because I'm afraid of how I'll feel if I don't? I want you to know that people pleasing isn't always about saying yes to other people's requests. People pleasing can also come in the form of compromising yourself for the sake of being accepted by others, or not being rejected by others, not being ridiculed by others. So am I saying yes to this, or am I saying yes because I'm afraid of how I'll feel if I don't? Can also apply to how you're compromising yourself for the sake of other people, whether it's to protect them, whether it's for you to be accepted, whether it's to to keep the peace in your environment, in your home life, in your work life, whatever that looks like? Are you saying yes, or are you saying yes because you're afraid? If you're saying yes to the request or compromising yourself because of its intention, right? So if you're saying yes to your coworker asking you to watch their dog on Saturday night, if you're saying yes to the request itself because you want to give from an overflow, it's going to help you to feel expansive. However, if you realize that you're saying yes because you're afraid of how you'll feel, so maybe you're afraid that if you say no to your coworker, they're not going to like you, or you're afraid of the feeling, the tightness, the tenseness that happens when you imagine saying no and you can imagine seeing their face of dissent. If you are saying yes because of that, the fear of the feeling that happens when you say no, then you're compromising who you are for the sake of keeping the peace, to be comfortable. And we all know that we stay in the comfort bubble when we want, what's the saying? I got so stuck in this phrase. This comfort zone is where we stay. This comfort bubble is where we stay when we want to... No, it's backwards. There's some other phrase that I'm not getting right, and it's not going to land precisely, so I'm not going to say the phrase. But essentially, you stay in your comfort zone when you are afraid to stretch out. When you stay in your comfort zone, you are withering away. You might as well be dead if you're going to spend the rest of your life in your comfort zone. I know that's a very provocative thing to say, but I mean it. If you are going to spend the rest of your life where you're comfortable, you might as well be dead. In the study of the Kabbalah, there is this idea, this notion that we are all here to work on what they call the tikkuns, right? Our karma. We need to correct certain things from past lives. That's why we're here, or so the Kabbalah says, right? And their idea, their notion, which I'm actually kind of playing around with a little bit and trying to feel my way into this to see what parts of it resonate. But this idea, this notion that once all of your karma has been cleared and you've corrected all of your wrongs, what happens is you're no longer needed here. You have no reason to be alive in this human form. And so you die, right? Your physical body dies. That's the idea, right? So if you're going to stay in your comfort zone, your comfort bubble, for the rest of your life, you might as well just leave your physical body because you're not here to do what you're here to do. So if you realize that you're making decisions because you want to feel comfortable, because you don't want to feel the discomfort, the momentary discomfort, then what are you doing here? And I'm saying this with the deepest part of my heart, where I am so in love with who you really are and your capacity, in awe of your capacity to be courageous. I'm saying this with the utmost, deepest respect. If you're here to settle in your comfort bubble, why are you here? So when you realize that you are saying yes to something because you are afraid to be uncomfortable, know that you are compromising the true essence of who you really are. So in the last episode, we talked about how I like to start by saying aloha, by sharing my love for you, my unconditional regard for you, and to remind you that you are the creator, you are the agency of carrying your breath and your attention. For a long time, I struggled with actually allowing myself to say that in public spaces, because society told me that if I were to say aloha, that I would be in a space where I was completely misappropriating culture, that I don't live in Hawaii, I don't have Hawaiian background or heritage, so I shouldn't be saying that. So for a really long time, I felt so conflicted in my desire. I felt so ashamed in my desire to be able to say aloha to you, to say I love you, I see you, know that you are powerful. And then I had this realization through the Bodhi Sparks this summer, where we learned to just pause for the sake of pausing. And that gave me the space to become aware that as a I don't even want to say a survivor of people pleasing, but as someone that used to people please, not as much, but still I see remnants of it. I wanted to say yes to, okay, I won't say the things I want to say because then I'm misappropriating and I might offend some people. I realized that because I was saying yes to it that way, I was saying yes, I don't want to feel the discomfort, that I was telling myself subconsciously that my desires were not right, that there's something shameful about my desire to want to share my love, to express my unconditional regard for you and for this life. And it shattered everything. So the first step is to pause, to remember that you have agency. You are in empowerment of your experience right now in this present moment. But then if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty and have something tangible to practice, to step out of your people-pleasing habits, just ask yourself the simple question, am I saying yes to this thing, this request? Or am I saying yes to not wanting to feel discomfort? Because I'm afraid of how I'll feel if I don't. Those two steps, for me, so far my experience of teaching it, of living it, has been complete in helping us step out of the people-pleasing habits. And I hope that there's something in there for you that you can take away and make it your own and be able to use and harness the power that comes with these two steps. As always, please feel free to let me know if you have any questions, any feedback, any suggestions. You can email me at jisunny@bodifully.com. That's JISUNNY @bodifully.com. Or feel free to leave a comment here if you're listening on Spotify. Yes, Spotify. As always, I love you, and I hope you remember that it is intentional and endless possibilities await. I will see you on the other side.